مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. على مدى السنوات الثلاثين الماضية كان الشرق الأوسط مركزا للسياسة الخارجية الأميركية. لقد خضنا 3 حروب في هذه المنطقة: لتحرير الكويت، وتدمير القاعدة، والإطاحة بصدام حسين. ونفذنا العديد من العمليات لمحاربة الإرهاب، وحماية النقل البحري الدولي، ومعاقبة الدول المتطرفة مثل إيران وسوريا. الآن بدأت سياستنا الخارجية تتغير للتركيز على التحدي الذي تشكله الصين بجميع أبعاده: الاقتصادية، السياسية، الدبلوماسية، الإيديولوجية، والعسكرية بالطبع. هل يمكننا حماية مصالحنا في كلتا المنطقتين، الشرق الأوسط وآسيا، في الوقت نفسه؟ هل لدينا الإرادة السياسية؟ هل لدينا الموارد الاقتصادية والعسكرية؟ هل إدارة بايدن مستعدة لهذا التحول الاستراتيجي الضخم؟ لمناقشة التغيرات الأساسية التي هي قيد التنفيذ فيما يتعلق بالأمن القومي الأمريكي، ولمناقشة سياسة الولايات المتحدة تجاه الشرق الأوسط وآسيا والعالم، يسعدني أن أرحب بأحد أهم المفكرين الاستراتيجيين وقادة العسكريين في أمريكا، الجنرال ديفيد بترياس. By now, everyone viewing the show has seen many episodes marking 20 years after September 11th. We've talked about the victims, we've talked about the perpetrators. Now let's talk about the lessons and where America is in the next decade in the fight against an evolving terrorism threat, and how all this fits into the major focus of American national security: great power competition. I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, General David Petraeus. General Petraeus, thank you again for joining us on this special series. We're 20 years after 9/11. So much has changed in our ability to confront terrorism, as well as what the terrorists are able to bring to the table, as it were, in their own effort to launch terrorism. When you put it all together and make an evaluation, are we better off today in the fight against terrorism than we were before?
Well, I think the biggest single metric is that there has not been another 9/11 attack, another attack of any significance really on our homeland. In fact, if you total up all of the attacks that might be attributed to Islamist extremism, it's somewhere around 100 that have died in the last, again, 20 years. There are many other sources of much greater number than that, very clearly. Certainly, there has been a metastasization of the Islamist extremist threat. It's no longer just in, say, Afghanistan or in some other countries in the Middle East. It's really proliferated throughout Africa. There are still certainly elements of it in the land of the two rivers, in Syria, in other parts of the Middle East, and certainly in Southeast Asia. But by and large, I think the United States, coalition countries, host nations have learned that you have to keep an eye on and pressure on Islamist extremists. And even if you can't carry out the whole comprehensive civil military campaign that you might like to pursue to get at the causes of extremism, at the very least, you can disrupt and degrade their capabilities so that they cannot even dream of conducting an operation like a 9/11 attack again. And the changes made in the United States and in most other countries to ensure the much swifter and more accurate and careful sharing of intelligence, the advances in actually bringing together disparate data sets and fusing them, the advance of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms like long dwell time drones, all of this, and now in a world of digital footprints, the internet, social media, and so forth. Again, it is very, very hard for an organization to plan what the Al-Qaeda did prior to 9/11, and even tougher, needless to say, to carry it out. But that does not mean that that threat is not very, very serious, and that in a number of countries around the world, indeed, that it is a good bit more serious than it was, say, just before 9/11.
So how concerned are you about new technologies and their use by terrorists, terms that we didn't even have in our lexicon 20 years
Yes.
ago? Cyber attacks, drones.
Yeah.
Are they one step ahead of us, or are we one step, hopefully even more than that, ahead of them?
Well, I think we're generally many steps ahead of them in certain aspects, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to respond to the actions that they have taken. We have seen what the advance of simple drones can do. We have seen what the threats that can come through cyberspace. In fact, many observers fear the so-called cyber 9/11, keeping in mind that, again, these extremist groups members have shown a willingness to blow themselves up to take us with them. What would prevent them, if they did ever have the cyber equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction, or indeed if they could even get a dirty bomb or a true biological or chemical or, God forbid, nuclear device, that kind of scenario, I think, is very, very concerning. And so you have to stay riveted on this threat, even as you discussed in your opening remarks, the context in which all of this is playing out has changed very dramatically. The rise of China, the resurgence of great power rivalries that was captured in the national security strategy of the Trump administration, the evolution of those challenges, I think, changes the global context very, very significantly. And I believe that this administration, and indeed the previous several, have all rightly sought to reduce our commitments against Islamist extremists and others, and some of the challenges in the Middle East, without leaving. This is not a pivot away. This is a rebalance to the Indo-Pacific region. And the biggest of the big ideas these days, really around the world, I think, but certainly with the US and its allies and partners around the world, is to craft a coherent, comprehensive whole of governments with an S on the end, so all capabilities of all allies and partners for the engagement with China, to try to make that relationship as mutually beneficial as is absolutely possible, but above all, to ensure that there is no stumbling or mistake or misperception that leads to true conflict. And that is the biggest task, I think, of the United States, and again, of our allies and partners around the world today. And that is how it is being approached, indeed, by this administration, and I think properly so. If you look at what they started by doing right away, was engaging allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific, in some cases where there were strong relationships, in some other cases where there were a few bruises from the previous administration, shifted then to Europe. We had the UK summit, the G7 summit hosted by the UK, EU summit, NATO summit, other summits, even the summit with Putin, all in preparation, of course, for the engagement with President Xi and with China. Now you have a bruise, if you will, from a perception at the very least of a lack of insufficient consultation on Afghanistan, and then the disarray, if you will, of how that withdrawal was carried out. China using that to say, see, we told you that the U.S. is a declining power. We told you they're an undependable partner. And then a little bit of a bruise also from the U.S., UK, Australia deal, where Australia is going to opt for U.S. and UK nuclear submarine technology rather than French, without apparently giving sufficient warning to our longstanding French allies. But again, I think that all can be dealt with, and this overarching effort will go on. And perhaps I might just quickly use the analogy of the guy in the circus who gets a plate on a stick and then gets more plates up, and he has a whole bunch of them. A superpower, the United States has to keep a lot of plates spinning on a lot of sticks. The biggest of those plates, probably bigger than all the others together, is that plate that represents the U.S. and its allies and partners relationship with China. That's the one that matters the most, but you can't let all those other plates drop on the floor, because they also have consequences as well.
Well, I know that you're someone who has balanced a lot of plates for many years. Let me ask you about China just for a moment. When you look at the challenge from China, the strategic challenge, which image do you have in mind? Is China a competitor, adversary, rival, enemy? What do you see? What's the right term to describe China?
Well, I think China is, in a sense, all of the above, and we have to keep that in mind. This is not the Cold War between East and West, the US-led West against the Soviet-led East, in which there was very, very little economic interaction. The US and China, on any given day, depending on what we're doing with Canada and Mexico, our other two major trading partners, we are the biggest trading partners of each other in the world. You cannot decouple from China. There can be some selective, and there will be, and there are technology issues. There are dual use technologies that can be used in military as well as in a normal civilian economy. I mean, there's lots of these issues. But again, you cannot decouple from China. China is the biggest trading partner, the biggest export destination for, I think it's 60 to 70 countries around the world. Its growth is what really pulled us out of the Great Recession. Its growth has fueled the rise of many, many other countries that, again, are its principal trading partners. But having said that, there clearly are areas of very distinct competition, and not just economic competition, but into the diplomatic, into the realm of security competition and so forth. And there are disagreements about some of that. And that's where the management of this relationship is so very, very important. I mentioned earlier, this is a relationship that all of us together want to make as mutually beneficial as we possibly can. But above all, what we have to do is ensure that there are no misperceptions, that there's no cause on the part of China to think that the U.S. does not have the capabilities and the will needed to employ those if there were some situation that required that. Now, again, we don't want that. But to ensure that, as you well know, Rob, you have to ensure that you have those capabilities and that demonstrated will. And of course, what we want to get to is, together with all of our allies and partners, the kind of exchange, the kind of dialogue that we still hope can resolve some of the differences that have emerged, noting that there are going to be very significant differences around the nature of our respective systems, around a variety of issues that we hold dear, that they see through a different prism. But that's what stuff that we have to work our way through.
All right, when we come back after the break, I'm going to ask General Petraeus to put on his cap as former head of intelligence and ask us how the world looks at America, especially in light of all the turbulent politics that we've been having in our country in recent years. In just a moment. Again, our guest today is General David Petraeus. Few Americans are as synonymous with the term national security as is our guest. General Petraeus served for 37 years in the United States Army, rising to be a 4-star general. He had the unique distinction of serving as commander of U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq, commander of U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan, and as commander of all U.S. forces in the Middle East, in what is known as Central Command, or CENTCOM. Then he took off his uniform, put on a suit, and served his nation as Director of Central Intelligence in the Obama administration. It's a privilege to host him on Dakhla, Washington. So, General, let me ask you, as someone who looks at the world, to take a look at how the world looks at America. We've had remarkably turbulent politics in our country. How does that affect both how our allies and our adversaries view the United States?
Well, it's very important. And I should just note that, of course, we've just recently, in recent weeks here in the United States, hosted the UN General Assembly. And that brings to New York and to Washington large delegations, even in a virtual year. And I had occasion to meet with a number of them during that time. And a number of them did ask what is going on here? How do you see things? And I think in this regard, it's appropriate for President Biden to have said early on that foreign policy, more than at any other time, really does begin at home. It begins with combating the pandemic. We made enormous gains in his early months, plateaued a bit. Now I think starting to take off with some new initiatives again, bringing the economy back, that going really quite well. And of course, I'm a partner in a global investment firm, and that's what we monitor and participate in. Bit of a slowdown with the Delta variant, but again, that is taking off again. Then it's his legislation to invest in the physical and human infrastructure to get the debt limit raised, to get budgets passed, and all the rest of this. Rocky right now, and again, we'll see if that can even out. We have a tradition of a degree of drama associated with that in various years. But then the question of, can the country be brought back together? Something he has also explicitly identified as being hugely important, because of course, that is the foundation on which we stand when we try to go around the world and bring together partners and allies and reinvigorate alliances and international organizations and various initiatives, again, for the most important issue in the world, which is, again, building that relationship with China, which we want to do from a position together with our allies and partners, assets that, in a sense, we uniquely enjoy in this particular situation. And indeed, these ambassadors, foreign ministers, and others have said, boy, January was pretty rocky, wasn't it? Wow, look at what's happening on Capitol Hill right now. Look at the hearings on this issue or that issue, pretty contentious. Of course, the postmortem, if you will, on Afghanistan and so forth. And so it is a period, I think, where the rest of the world is looking at the United States and asking, what will the foundation on which we build our relationship with the world, what will the character of that leadership be? The president has said the U.S. is back, but of course we then withdrew from Afghanistan and then surprised our closest, longest standing ally with the nuclear submarine deal. So again, it's still early days. We're still well within the first year of this administration, a very, very talented and experienced team, but an awful lot of plates to keep spinning, as we discussed earlier, for a team that is still to some degree coming together, noting that many of the ambassadors are still to be confirmed by the Senate for their new positions. So again, I think very much a work in progress. It's one that the optimists among us, I think, hope that we'll work our way through these various challenges, that the foundation will be solidified, and that will enable the U.S. to, if you will, to resume in certain respects, albeit with a degree perhaps of tiny bit more modesty and a tiny bit of intellectual humility, the leadership of the rest of the world, certainly those others that want to join in the freedoms that we cherish, democracy, free market economics, and the like.
We only have a couple of minutes left, General. I did want to ask you, based on your experience, your lengthy experience, about the role of Congress in this entire discussion. It says that it wants more authority to deal with national security and foreign policy making. Of course, sometimes when it is given the chance to show it, it doesn't always stand up, as we saw when President Obama turned to Congress for authorization for military action on the Red Line. What's your solution? What's your view about the right mix of presidential, congressional views on key national security decisions?
Well, clearly there has to be a partnership. Again, there are limits to how far even the expansive presidential and executive authorities have taken us. And let's recognize that in the wake of 9/11, that has expanded very considerably. But each time, as you note, I was the director of the CIA. Remember, for example, during the Obama administration, when there was an effort that we put forward to refine the authority to use military force. It had already been in force for well over a decade. Of course, it was passed right after the 9/11 attacks. Congress kept saying that they wanted to circumscribe or refine or limit somewhat the authorities that were provided to the president by that particular legislation. And yet when they were given that opportunity, it did not, it died on arrival, essentially. You noted when the Syria Red Line went to them, the votes were not there, and some other occasions. So again, I think you continue to see a still very assertive presidency. And even when the other party is not in power, when they get in power, they adopt a similar approach. And Congress yet to really come to grips with how it does want to rein in some of the executive authorities that have been accrued in the post 9/11 period in particular. But that is a debate that is ongoing. I think it's a healthy debate. I do think that the orientation of the current administration to some degree, again, to modestly reduce our involvement in certain activities, enhance it in others, and certainly, of course, to withdraw from Afghanistan, that in some respects that is responding to congressional desires, and certainly in some cases, some popular desires.
So, General, between you and me and all of our viewers, a very secret question, which is, if you had a couple of minutes with the President of the United States all alone, what would you tell him?
You know, I actually think that now that Afghanistan is done, and that would have been a discussion point, and certainly I would emphasize the continued moral obligation we have to really quite a number of individuals that have been left behind, who put their lives at risk serving with our soldiers on the ground or with our diplomats, aid development workers, and so forth. That set aside. But by and large, I think the international approach, again, of reinvigorating some alliances, continuing the strength of others, working with partners and allies, real consultation, though, because one of the messages of recent weeks during UNGA and in the wake of the UN General Assembly gathering has been that, you know, the US thinks it's consulting, but it has not really, in their eyes, been consulting as much as it thinks it has. That does have to be dramatically augmented and amplified, but all in the interest of trying to achieve this coherent, comprehensive whole of governments, to which you do need to add a couple of really key elements, one of the most important of which is trade. This is a very tough topic. Obviously, the Democratic Party is very aligned with the labor movement, and even the Republican Party, the party of trade under President Trump, did not pursue the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But if you're really going to have that comprehensive approach, I think we have to get back into that because it's even more important from a geopolitical or geostrategic perspective than it is actually from a trade and economic perspective, but hugely significant, especially with China trying to get into the son of TPP, the Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership, if you will. So that, I think, would be the areas, those would be the areas in which I would focus. But by and large, also, just wishing him really, really good luck because of the challenges of the weeks that we have had and lie ahead on Capitol Hill. Because if we cannot get that secure foundation for our country, we will be standing on a platform that is not as firm as one would hope it would be.
General David Petraeus, it's been a privilege to host you on داخل Washington. Thank you very much for joining us on our show. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول دار السين في سياسة الخارجية الأميركية، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل وإلى أن ألقاكم. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.